Star Journey Live. I'm Sarah Tamer, immigration reporter at MPR News. Right now, I'm at this. Oh, sure. Okay, we'll do that again. That was kind of a good practice, wasn't it? Lets the nerves out. Yeah. All right, we're ready to go. Take two. Hello, everyone, and welcome to North Star Journey Live. I'm Sarah Tamer, immigration reporter at MPR News, and right now I'm at the studios of the St. Paul Neighborhood Network with my fellow immigration reporter, Caitlin Vu. I'm so happy you're here with me. And we are here for a collaborative conversation about how Minnesota's immigrant communities record and remember their culture. So important. It can be a tricky thing to preserve the memory and traditions from your home country as you adapt to conditions in Minnesota. And really, there's never been a better time to talk about how communities can hold on to their stories and preserve those important memories. Right, Caitlin?
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. We know there's a lot happening in immigration right now, but I think we've all wondered our parents' and grandparents' stories about how they got to Minnesota. We see old photos and baby blankets and toys, and we want to keep that for memories. A lot of our listeners may trace their family stories to Germany or Scandinavia in the late 1800s. Back then, more than 1 in 3 Minnesotans were born abroad. But this year, Minnesota is celebrating a major milestone. We're marking the 50th anniversary of many Southeast Asian groups, people who are Hmong, Lao, Cambodian, and Vietnamese who came to the United States.
Almost 500,000 people who live in Minnesota today were born outside of the United States. Over the past several decades, major populations have come to Minnesota from Laos, Somalia, Mexico, Liberia, Ethiopia, and more recent arrivals have moved here from Burma, Ecuador, Afghanistan, India, and China, just to name a few.
So what a better time to remember and record our family's histories of how they got to Minnesota. And we have an amazing panel here today to talk about ways you can preserve your family's story and cultural traditions.
All right, so I want to introduce our wonderful panelists. I'm going to start with Diego Waman, who is the interim director of Movimiento Comunitario. I said that right. Minnesota, an advocacy and resource organization for communities of color. Thank you so much for being here. So excited to learn more. We also have Julie Vang. She is the program director for Green Card Voices. It's a nonprofit that uses storytelling to build community connections between immigrants and their neighbors. Thank you so much for joining us. Then we have Marian Hassan. Marian is a Minnesota educator and writer helping to preserve Somali oral histories. We are so excited to have you here, Marian. And finally, we have Sangmini Labud. He is an independent scholar and community advocate who studies Southeast Asian history and is helping to document the history of the Lao diaspora. Wow, so great to have you.
Sarah and I spend hours talking to people about their immigration stories and their new lives in Minnesota.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about your family's arrival to the United States and how you got here and how it started. So maybe, Diego, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about your family and where it all began.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you for having me today. And I'm really happy to come here and share my story, my family stories, right? Because my family is a mixed style family. Back then, in 1995, my mom decided to migrate to United States, going through a big trip. At some point in the story, she got detained in Cuba.
Wow.
And it's a lot of loopholes that a lot of people have to take, challenges, risks to get here. I was 1 year old when she left me in Ecuador, and I didn't came to meet her after 16 years.
Wow.
So my mom, after living here for more than 15 years, she was able to fix her status and able to bring me, my other brother. She was a single mother of 5 kids. When she decided to come here, she was first. Then my other 2 brothers were like, we miss mom. Then they decided to take the trip, but we were too young to take the trip. So when my mom fixed her status, we got here and everything started with me learning the definition of being documented and the challenges that I get to face through my oldest brother when I have to be the one driving him. I had to be the one like taking him here. And by one day, he decided to go pick up his kid, and he got detained by the police. And then after that, like, my mom was like, "Hey, can we go get him?" I was like, "Sure." It was like 8 in the morning. We had to pay the ticket because he didn't have a driver's license back then. Now he does. Thanks for the fight. And we paid the ticket, and then after that, it went through my mom. We waited for more than 5 hours outside for getting to get released. And then we just got sheriff came to and tell us he's not getting released, he's getting sent to immigration. So my mom literally got on her knees and started crying, begging him to let him go. That's when I realized the big challenge that my family was facing while I was not here. Because my mom was one of them. My brothers were one of the, like, who were not able to be free to go up there to work, to go with their kids, to go to movie theaters, and things like that. They had to face a lot of challenges to survive at this point. So that's when I realized I had to take the chance to get more involved in high school and trying to understand the political landscape and systematic things that really, really our communities face day by day. Because I live firsthand with my mom, seeing your mom breaking down on a police officer on her knees, begging him. It was really traumatic for myself. At that time, I was 17 years old. But it is a spark to fight for others. Because now we see how we move so far with all these policies here in Minnesota, but there is still more work to do, you know? So that's when everything started with my family. Love you, mom. She was a single mother of 5 kids, and she did everything she could, and until now, she's still fighting for us, and we're still fighting. At this point, I'm still fighting in the movement for my oldest brother, so until we get immigration reform.
Thank you so much for sharing. It's really powerful. And you carry that with you and in the work that you're doing right now.
Yes, and that's what I do, what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Marin, can you tell us a little bit about your own immigration journey?
Hi, everyone. So when Hannah, one of the organizers of the event, contacted me, and she asked me to be a panelist and to talk about my immigration story, it was really challenging for me. I was taken aback. I thought, which one? Is it the one that happens, the story before the story? When, like now in this country, I hope it doesn't head that way. I'm trying not to be political. Person is political. When things are impending, there is something coming that is felt. And I come from Somalia. And there was a 21 years of regime that was in power from 1969 to 1990. So the story before the story is that anticipation of what's to come, that we can see the lack of tolerance, we can see, well, I was very young at that time, but I knew, I mean, we saw the tribal mindset that these people, we have to stop them before they do this, and demonizing this group. And so that's I'll be very brief, but that's kind of the story before the story. And then there's the exodus or the leaving, the anticipation of that, which is nerve-wracking, but also exciting for what is to come. And then there's that other one, which is the arrival. And the arrival brings a great deal of anxiety and but excitement, right? I'm willing to do what I need to do to have a new start. And I come from a very established, very educated family, but my father was in opposition to the Somali regime and was constantly interrogated, intimidated, imprisoned. So the arrival is full of promise, like the Italians or the Irish or the many, many before who came to this country, that ideal of better future. And then I thought, what about the story of displacement, that bereavement or grief of what's left behind, that's haunting, but always exaggerated as if it was the perfect life. That's the experience of immigration. The good life, the most amazing life that's left behind is always remembered. And then there is also the immigration within immigration, or the coming from one place in North America and choosing to immigrate to the US for this time economics and better opportunities. Initially, fear of persecution and fear, but here now, better life. And then Minnesota, coming where the community is and choosing that thoughtfully because of, again, Minnesota is a very progressive state, very educated, democratic, and the promise to belong was more pronounced. And then I thought the story about becoming a mother to children who are second generation and the negotiations that happen constantly and the reintroduction of who we are to our children and telling them that we actually have an incredible legacy. We're not dissolute and need someone to save us. We actually have a long-standing legacy. We come from a very brave and ancient society, right? And telling them that we have a legacy and we chose to come to this country and to take up some space for yourself. And that's still ongoing. We have 3 children, and this conversation is constant. So which story to share?
Thank you so much, Marian. That was beautiful. In my reporting, I often like to ask immigrants that I talk to, instead of asking them, why did you come to the United States? I like to ask, why did you leave your home? Right, because words matter, and people have lives and cultures that they leave behind, and it's kind of a good segue. I wanted to ask you, Sungmini, what was your journey like here as a refugee from Laos? Why did you leave?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Sabaidi, everyone. It's how long do we have? I asked myself that too in terms of like. Do I tell a linear story or do I tell vignettes, right? And so my story, my family story, and like many refugees from Laos, really start with empire building, right? Colonialism by France, empire building by Japan and the U.S. as well, and involvement in Southeast Asia, and so after U.S. withdrawal from Southeast Asia, from Laos. My family didn't leave right away, right, in 1975. My father was a soldier who worked along the Americans in the middle of Laos, middle country of Laos. And he tried to adapt to this new government. Tried to adapt to the new government. We were rice farmers for many generations. My father was sent to re-education camp, and then later on to what they call a seminar, where every weekend or every month would be re-educated in the teaching of the new government there. And my father found out that they were going to be some investigation on him, and so he wanted to leave, and so my parents devised a plan. They sold their, the last ration of rice to pay someone with a boat, and so we, on the day of the exodus, we took different trips, different routes. I was 2 at the time. We took different routes, so no one would be suspicious. My dad had a bike shop, and so he had asked a relative to go open the bike shop for him, right? And so once we got to the shore of the Mekong River, instead of 2 boats, there were only 1 boat waiting for us. And so, it was my parents, my older brother, older sister, myself, and my younger sister, who's newborn. And so got on the boat, got to Thailand midday. Unfortunately, there wasn't any soldiers that were patrolling the riverbank, and so we were fortunate to reach Thailand. And so from the perspective of Thailand, we were undocumented immigrants. We're seeking asylum. And so my father was in prison in Thailand for a bit. Then finally we were relocated into a refugee camp in Thailand. And so a year and a half later, with multiple medical exams, we were approved to immigrate to the U.S. I have my family's immigration document. There's an X-ray of my chest. X-rays of chest are to test if folks have TB. In my medical exam, it was noted that I was a malnourished child, weighing 24 pounds at 3 years old.
Wow.
And so, we took our trips, and what I remember as a 3-year-old child in a refugee camp is the destitute of the camp, the starvation, right, the ration, unsanitary, and that folks had to do, again, like multiple medical exams to be able to come to the U.S. I just remember as a child hearing my parents saying that the embarrassment of like having to strip off your clothes to be examined when there's a bunch of people around.
Yeah.
So I mean that's a short portion of my journey, right? We went to Bangkok, we went to the Philippines for 6 months for a processing center, immigration processing center, and finally to Atlanta, Georgia, where my aunt and her church, her Baptist church, sponsor us. And so I didn't really understand these type of stories until I was in college. I mean, in high school, there was no curriculum. I didn't understand my own history. It was not until college that I did my own research on my history. And that's one of the reasons why I continue to be part of multiple projects to really document the experience of immigrants and refugees.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Diego, Marian, and Sagmani for sharing your immigration stories. As time goes on, these stories can get lost. Julie, as a daughter of immigrants, did your parents share their immigration stories with you?
Just like how we're sitting here, that's how my parents always tell their immigration stories. I come from a family of 12, so I'm the middle child. I have 6 sisters and 5 brothers, and here I am as the middle child, queer, living here in Minnesota in America. Born on the east side of St. Paul, but my heart is where my parents' homes are, my parents' home is, and that's back in Laos, the mountaintops in St. Kwa. So that's one of the provinces in Laos. They were farmers in the beat of the sun, and they loved it, being browned and sun-kissed by the sunlight. They really just enjoy the nature of life that was just wild and free. There was also a huge river right next to their village, and so they would always go and catch some crabs right under the rocks or go fishing with a handmade net. And so they were really living a life where they were being abundant with the resources that they have. And so that's the life that they continue to live. And it was a really beautiful time, the way my mom and my dad describe it. And it wasn't until the Sequel War, also known as the Vietnam War, happened around 1975. And that really just was a huge shock and a turning point for them. So they had to take 3 of my older siblings and really just, they just, at the time as they were describing it, there was no words to it. There were no preparation. It was just like, what do we do? And the decision was to leave for safety because they wanted to live. And so every time I think about living in this moment, I think about, wow, the sacrifices that my parents, that they have to made. And so they fled through the Sequel War and sought refuge in Thailand. And so they crossed the Mekong River in a handmade boat with bamboos. And so my mom couldn't swim, and she's so terrified of the water. But I, on the other hand, love the water because, the trauma continues to live through the generations. But here I'm trying to break the generation. And so I'm enjoying and cleansing with the water. And so as they cross the Mekong River and they seeked refuge in one of the camps in Thailand called Ching Kwong. And so it's one of the 8 refugee for a lot of the Hmong folks that saw refuge. And so they stay in the refugee camp for 3 years. And there were a lot of starvation and really just, they had to make their own ways of life. But it wasn't sustainable, like you couldn't survive through that. And so the US, because my dad was a soldier, and a lot of my relatives were soldiers and supported the CIA with the US, they were able to grant access to the United States. They didn't know where they were going. They're like, we're ready to get out of here, and so we can live the life of freedom. And so they landed here in Minnesota on January 26, 1988. No jackets, frozen hands. My mom described, like, my eyebrows were so frozen. It was not looking good. And so they lived in the projects. So we lived in one of the communities, McDonough Homes, for quite some time until we were out of from governmental assistance into sustaining ourselves. And so my parents have been homeowners for the last 10 years. And here I am, continue to carry their stories with my family, but also with each other. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know, too, from firsthand experience, so I'm also an immigrant. My parents immigrated to the U.S. from Palestine, and I kind of have to catch my dad on a good day to ask him about our history because it's so traumatic. They don't always want to answer your questions, or you ask it, like, it'll be the most random time, and I'm like, hey, what happened in 1968 again? Could you remind me? And they don't always want to talk about it. So I'm curious, and this is a question for everybody, as you're thinking about this, how do you preserve your family's history and memories, and then pass that down onto your children and your friends and community members? How are you doing that? Maybe I'll start with you, Diego.
Sure. Just sharing quick. My mom got to tell me the story because when I just got here, I remember I got here in April 29th, and she took me to work April 30, the next day. She said, you're going to learn what I've been doing, right? And on our way there, I asked her, and that's when I took everything, and I told my little brother. So he was born here. He don't know nothing about, like, what was my mom's way to get here, and what was our way to be living without our mother for 16 years. And the greatest part of that, it shows the resilience that came in within our blood, within our strength and use that to empower others, to use their resources, use what they got to overcome the challenges. Because just like my mom and other community members in other, like here, we overcome those challenges. So every time that I have a chance, I talk to my older brothers. I talk to, when they have a downtime, like, hey, remember you overcome this. Like this is bigger, was bigger than what it is now. And same thing for community members, because that's how we stick together through stories. That's how we connect and we identify each other. So driving a car with my mom, or dinner time, or sometimes in the holidays. And we just, at this point, yes, it is traumatic, but at some point it becomes, you heal from it, and then you just laugh. And then you just become like, wow, I did it. And look at where I am. So that's why in our family, when we tell the story, we just start laughing at some point. Oh, my mom, oh, I got detained in Cuba, and you don't know what happened there. And then she
Yeah.
just started telling us, but I overcome that. So,
Yeah.
and then it was, the way how she tells the story now is so different after, because she got involved in the movement as well for a quite bit. And now she tells so happy to others, I did this, you can do it.
Wow.
You know, and so that's how we use our stories to empower others to, especially on my community, to, you know, sometimes there's dark days in the system, and we need to remind ourselves that there's a bigger monster out there we overcome, and these are just challenges that life put on ourselves, and there is one way or another we're gonna win. Yeah.
They pass on the generational trauma, but also the strength.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because that's what makes us stronger.
Yep.
We didn't die, we're here.
Yep.
You know, but there's other stories that we cannot tell, right? And each to their own, everyone has their own experience, but let's use that to empower us and fight for others as well.
Beautiful. And Julie, as you were sharing your story about your parents, I couldn't help but think of just kind of how lucky and what a blessing it is that you're able to hear those accounts from them. Because so much history can be lost when we lose our family members. So I guess same question for you. How do you move forward now, and how do you preserve those memories?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky that both my parents are still alive, and they're always a phone call away or a FaceTime now away. And so we're preserving these stories oftentimes comes from the kitchen. So there's bezos and lemongrass, and there's fishes and some meat. And that's where, as we're, getting distracted, prepping the food, getting the dishes ready, getting the ingredients together, that's where a lot of the healing and the stories come. And it's really random. Like my mom especially, she'll just instantly oh, this chili pepper reminds her of when she went out and was hanging out with her friends at the supermarket. And then I'm like, well, tell me more about the supermarket. How was that? Was it expensive? How did you even get how did you get paid to even go shopping and try to get that dress or that sewing fabric that you wanted? And so it comes a lot in various locations, definitely in just open space, in our living room, but definitely in the kitchen is where the stories comes. And I, because we live, thank goodness to technology, I love to voice record everything. So if you're in my phone, in my voice memo, there's tons of them. I'm getting into videography as well. And so I can really capture more visuals because memories get lost.
Yep.
And so in the moment, if I can capture the visual and the way it sounds and the way it's told, when they're no longer here, I can pass it down to my lineage or for all my siblings. So for those who are interested.
Marian, I wanted to ask you a similar question too. In Minnesota, we have a very big Somali population here. I, drive down Cedar. There's the Somali Mall. There's different restaurants, and so in a way, it feels like Somali culture is so ingrained in our society. But how do you do that on a personal level, on an individual level?
So the Somali culture is an oral culture. People talk all the time. Storytelling is just survival. It's part of who we are. If you plan to visit someone and you plan to be there for an hour, you'll find yourself staying there for hours.
Yeah.
So conversations. Now in Minnesota, we have what is known as third spaces, as you said. So you can make a day out of going to the Somali Mall, which we do with our children at least once a month, and having the chai tea and samosas and constantly talking. For Somali people, Somalia is it was a nomadic culture, camel herders and animal herders, and language is portable, and it's the only thing you have when you're out in the desert and you're on a long track. And so people talk, Somali people endlessly. If you meet someone within the first 15 minutes, it's very different from our American culture, but people will ask personal questions. Easily, you will know if you were married, if you have children, where you work, how long you've been here. All of those questions come up quickly. So I would say through talking, also poetry. There are many poems written now about the Muslim ban and the war on terrorism that America has been on since, I think, 9/11, 30 years, over 30 years now, poems made about so many things about the settlement that it's refreshing, but it's all done orally, I would say.
It's a very expressive culture. Very.
much so, yeah.
So I'm going to, by nature, you're a historian, you're a scholar. I mean, this is right up your alley. But is there a way that you do that on a personal level? Do you write poetry?
No, I'm envious of artists. So I wish I could write poetry, but I think at the personal level, this was about 10 years ago. I finally had the nerve to sit my parents down and record them.
Oh, wow.
And so prior to that, I've done so many oral history projects, interviewing so many people, both for preservation, but also as an ethnographer, right? But it was hard to talk to my own parents, and so it took me that long. And so in 2015, I sat them down, both of them. Audio and video recording about their life.
Why did it take you so long? I'm curious.
I think as a as a child, but also I think also from the perspective of my parents is that they just don't want to talk about it, or no one have ever asked.
Right.
Right. And so I had the equipment at the time as well that was convenient for me to really sit them down, and it was also leading a big oral history project. So it's like, why not interview my parents? And so I've talked about, I've asked about their experience growing up. They live in 2 adjacent villages, grew up together.
Wow.
Their rice field was across the street from each other, family's rice field for generations. So like really the stories of my parents is like a love story, a story of resilience, resiliency. And as a historian, I understand these historical contexts of the experience that they went through, but also based on my personal experience as well, right? The memory of a 3-year-old kid living in a refugee camp. But then, in terms of preserving it, it's down to the simple thing as scanning historical documents, right? Scanning immigration documents, what my parents had to go through. I've talked about my x-rays. I had all of my siblings, my parents' x-rays. I'm seen as a de facto historian of the family. We talking about like my plane ticket, right? How I still have a copy of those plane tickets. And the agreement we had to sign with the U.S. government to repay that for that plane ticket, right?
Wow.
So things like that, and you know, we grew up. They would tell us stories, and now I kind of help preserve that, but also with my own kids as well. When they were younger, I would tell them like stories of me when I was a kid, stories about my red rain boots that I traded in for candy, right? And so yeah, just breaking that cycle as well, right? Breaking that cycle and continue to have that conversations with the next generation. And so, yeah.
I find that sometimes I get really frustrated when I'm like looking for a photo or a childhood toy and I'm like, where is that? Why didn't you keep it? It's like, we were in survival mode for a long time. We weren't so worried about your blanket or your toy. Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I also really appreciate it. And Julie, at Green Card Voices, you hear a lot of stories like this. Can you tell us more about the work that you do at Green Card Voices and the importance of documenting stories like this?
At Green Card Voices, so we're based in Minneapolis, and our work is all about sharing the first-person stories of immigrants, by them, for the community, with the community. And so mainstream continues to tell immigrants like who they are, and this is why and the reasons they all came here. But oftentimes it's not the immigrants themselves speaking. And so we're here at Green Card Voices, we're here to flip the script to say, they're all your neighbors, they're right here. You can give them the mic, give them the platform, and they'll share their stories however you want that to be. And so we have published around 15 books already of immigrants coming from 8 different states here in the US. There's already over 500 different stories of immigrants coming from 145 different countries, alone here just in the US. And so you don't have to travel anywhere or to a different country to learn about someone's culture, about someone else. They're right here, and you can learn about them. And so our work is to ensure that folks are educated, and we start that in the school. And so a lot of our immigrants that we record firsthand are high school students. And many of them are typically newly arrivals. Because when you first share your story in that moment, there's a lot of details. And so we don't want to miss that. Because 10 years from now, it just becomes memories and experiences and things that get twisted and, altered. And in that moment, that's where the heart and the soul of those immigrant stories come from. So for example, in 2021, the Taliban took over in Afghanistan, and we did a special editions for our Afghan youth. And so we've already recorded 30 students from Afghanistan here in Minnesota to ensure that they, even if they have already come here for 1 month or a couple of months, they too can share their stories. They too can become authors and publish ones, have a published book. They don't have to wait until 10 years, 5 to 10 years to get an education and then become a writer or get a degree to share their stories. It's like right now in this moment, you have the credential, your credit, and you're validated, and you should be heard. And so we did a special edition for the Afghanistan. And then just recently we have, with what's happening in Ukraine, we've also have recorded stories of those coming from Ukraine. And so we continue to be in the urgency of the immigration landscape in the moment, because immigration tends to be conversation from the past, and it's not modern, and it's ever changing, and so we want to make sure that it's current and it's present, so we can have those real conversation in real time.
Yeah, definitely. And can you kind of share like what kind of resources are available for folks that they can use to help record their own stories?
So we use 6 open-ended questions, and that's all we use, and that's all we shared, nothing else. And those 6 open-ended questions can go on for hours. And so the resource is that we have this system in place of you sharing your own story through these 6 open-ended questions. We have a conversational card game where you call Story Stitch, where you can meet each other in different diverse communities and get to share your own personal stories through that. So it's almost like a icebreaker, but it goes deep really quick. Because now these days, everyone's having superficial conversation like, how was the weekend? Or what did you have for lunch? Now it's like, tell me a time. It's about like, tell me a time when you feel the greatest joy. Or like, when was the time when you feel most marginalized? And why was that?
Those are great questions.
And so that was co-created by 80 community members from all backgrounds. And so here we're always, it takes a village to even produce a book, to a conversational card game, to having that 6 open-ended questions that, is universal for anyone to share and access.
And I also wanted to ask you, Julie, at Green Card Voices, have you hit any roadblocks to having incoming immigrants and refugees be open to sharing their stories because of the uncertainty with Trump's immigration policies? I wonder, is it harder to get folks to open up compared to before Trump took office a second time?
I'll be honest, our community is scared and they're terrified. And we have to be in reality to say that your emotions are valid, and also be firm about our commitment to our work in amplifying these stories that is essential. And so we use a trauma-informed process in our oral history methodology. And so if any students who may be undocumented or may have a mixed status, or any asylum seekers or unknown status, whatever their status may be, if they don't want to share, if we do a video recording and during that recording, if they say something, we can always edit that out. Or if they don't want their name included, we can use a fictional name. So there's multiple ways to go around to still amplify their stories. That is not terrifying them, but it's empowering them. So for example, when we did the special edition for the Afghanistans, we didn't have any real life portraits. We hired an illustrator who was from Afghanistan to illustrate the students. And when we did the video recording, it was just their audio. And so you get to hear their own language and you get to hear their story still. So there's multiple ways to go around it that still empower them. But our priority above all is safety. No matter if it's political or emotionally, personally, or what's happening in the family.
Thank you. I saw you were nodding your head a lot. This is, of course, familiar work for you, Sangmini. You're one of the original founders of the Immigrant Stories Project at the University of Minnesota's Immigration History Research Center. That was a mouthful. Can you tell us a little bit more about that project and how it came to be?
Yeah, thank you. I was nodding because it's very similar to Green Card Voices, and Immigrant Stories and Green Card Voices came about at the same time, around the same time, right? And so, at the time, I was a program coordinator at the Immigration History Research Center, and we knew that, as educators, we'd ask students to write oral history projects. And oftentimes it will be a piece of paper, class assignment, and it's done, right? And so we were thinking, how do we like preserve those stories? And at the time, digital storytelling, the methodology itself was fairly new. And it's really a first-person narrative through videos. We asked a simple question at the very beginning: what's your immigrant stories and what tells your story?
What
and-
tells your story?
Yep. And so, as one of the developer of the project, I was the guinea pig. I told my own immigrant stories, and I used my plane ticket.
You brought it with you?
I brought it with me.
Is it laminated?
No, it's not. It's not laminated. It's in my closet at home. But yeah, it's just my plane ticket tells my journey, right? Port of entry, Seattle. From Seattle, came to Minneapolis, and then finally to Atlanta, Georgia, July 31st, 1986.
Wow.
Right. So how do I tell that story? And so it really started with that, and with colleagues, we were able to get a grant from the National Endowment for Humanities, multi-year project to develop an online platform where we can create curriculum for both educators and students themselves to create their own stories, digital story. And so one of the earliest story that we received from one of the student was about how their family communicated with folks, with family members who still live in Thailand or in Laos. And so her object was a big Sony boombox. He used that boombox to record cassette tapes, and would send that back and forth. And so she would tell her story about communicating with her cousin, who she never met through that cassette tape. And so right now, 13 years later, 12 years later, there's about 400 stories in the collection itself. At the University of Minnesota Immigration History Research Center and their partner, the archives there. And so the current team right now, will continue. It's important, right? It's very timely to collect these stories, and so I'm sure the project will continue.
You've collected so many. Do you have any idea how many stories you've collected?
Yeah, about a little over 400.
And out of the 400, is there one that sticks out to you?
Liang's is the boombox one that I just mentioned, but one is of a Hmong elder. So her story was, her object was the baby carrier. And so she told a story about leaving Laos. Her husband and 4 kids, and she had an infant in her baby carrier. She couldn't swim. They crossed the Mekong River. There were turbulence. She felt something on her leg, and when she got to the shore, the baby that she was carrying was gone. So as she was telling her story, she was sobbing, and she still has that baby carrier.
Wow.
And so it was also at the same time where young boy Alan Kurdi, right, from the escaping from Syria to Turkey, the media storm showed his Alan's images, his body on the beach, and so that those two stories really connected because like through space and time, people are escaping war and persecution, and these unfortunate loss of lives are as a result of these war and conflict.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and you you kind of touched on like the sadness that can come from talking about the past and the trauma that it can bring up for family members. Many families here in Minnesota, because of war and economic turmoil, they have had to leave their home countries. Sangmani and Julie, do you come across that challenge in the work that you do, and how do you approach that? Like, why is it still important to capture those moments in the history as well?
You want to go first, Julie?
Emotions are raw, and so those needs to be preserved. And that's part of storytelling. And a lot of it sometimes isn't captured through words, it's just the emotions of that person. And so we want to make sure that we still continue to preserve the reasons why someone, any immigrant refugee leave their home country. And a lot of it is through persecutions or through war. And we want to make sure that the mainstream continues to have one narrative of it, but there's multiple narrative of how it's captured in the everyday. And so local stories are powerful. And that's what we need to continue to utilize. And that's what we need to continue to preserve long term, because those are those are stories that we have access to right away, but also those are our real neighbors. And we're surrounded by them every day. And even if we're not, we may know someone who's surrounded by them. And so we need to continue to educate ourselves in real time again.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, right? It's educating ourselves. I always see myself as a lifelong learner, and so I think I do know these historical contexts when I'm speaking to people. Like, that's their truths. Like, I don't question their stories or their truth, right? And so doing that as well, but also going beyond. When we're talking about documenting stories, is going beyond like bigger institutions, and so having these stories being preserved within the community, and making sure that community knowledge stays in the community and is owned by the community, right? Because given the current situation, funding will be lost. Banning of stories, banning of books, banning of servers to specific stories, right, would happen. And so, yes, YouTube is a good place to document it, but it's, we should be able to create a different platform as well to make sure that our stories and our resources are not taken away from us, and to make sure that these stories remain in community and that it's accessible to community.
And it sounds like you both are doing a great job of that. Well, as a reminder, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to a North Star Journey live conversation in collaboration with Sahan Community Live. I'm NPR News senior reporter Sarah Tamer with Sahan Journal's Caitlin Vu, and we are talking about newcomers to Minnesota, how they remember and preserve their immigration stories. I also want to remind people that you can text us questions. That's 651-504-8170. And thank you so much for tuning in if you are. Marian, I wanted to bring you into the conversation because last fall you received a state grant to launch the Sing Again Lullaby and Oral History Project. I love that name, by the way. Tell me a little bit more about what you're doing with that.
Thank you. So this project is so important to me, but it's also so necessary for the continuation of the Somali language in the use of how children are speaking the home language. Somali children are losing the home language at a staggering rate. Usually, immigrant children lose the language. Usually, they do if they are not preserved. But usually, the third generation, second generation, maybe. But very quickly, we're seeing parents and children are not speaking the same language. In a given family, you will have parents who are not fluent in English trying to speak to children who are not fluent in Somali. So it's become difficult with parenting, with cohesion. So my interest is in early literacy. That's the bulk of my work. And what I'm interested to do is to document the lullabies and the children's songs. Those are the early literacy foundation. And they are very rich, and they carry messages and cultural values. And they exist in the minds of the adults, but not on a page often. So the way I'm doing this is, again, something I'm passionate about, which is the elderly in our communities who are the bearer or the carriers of the language and culture. But they themselves are going through migration and displacement and not having the access to belong to this society, because younger people do have that access to work in school, etc. So it's such a revelation to interview. I'm interviewing since last May, and sitting down with Somali elderly and really asking them 3 questions. First one being, what is your memories of home? And that takes a long time to just to listen to their memories of home, and then talk about their migration stories. And coming to Minnesota is also incredibly moving and interesting, and as well as how values of parenting and how they've used language for child rearing. So it's a wonderful project. The outcome of the project will be a pioneering, one-of-a-kind collection of Somali lullabies, illustrated, bilingual, which will be accessible to schools, to families, as well as I'm recording the grandmothers singing. So you have a lot of families who will have intergenerational experiences, a lot of children who will never hear a grandmother singing can listen to that as they go to bed or in the car. We are archiving all of the collection, the material on a website, for future use as well. And so it's an exciting project. Thanks for asking me.
And you have a physical part of it with you. I see your journal. And it sounds like you have a journal entry documenting a Somali grandmother's journey. I'd love to have you read a little excerpt of it, if you're okay with that, and then provide a little context of what it's about.
So what I will do is actually share from the oral conversation I've had. When you were asking about how do you preserve, I'm a journal keeper. So I have many years I journal on a daily basis. And I think that's also therapeutic for folks to reflect on what's going on in their lives in the past. What I wanted to say, something I agree with you before I share that story, is for the audience to really reflect on immigrant stories in the context of history. Because immigrants don't get up one day and come to this country, whether it's the Jewish people who had to leave Germany for safety and survival, and whether it's other Europeans who had to flee and leave out of poverty, or all kinds of immigration movements are the result of history. And so as you talk about your experience and as I talk about mine, it's a world history. And if we document the stories that we know that had us move from what we knew, I mean, what makes someone to get up and leave everything that they knew, right? So these are important stories. The story I want to tell you is told to me by a grandmother. She's in her early 80s. Her name is Fatima. She was telling me, she started out by saying, the story I want to tell you is the story that I moved 12 times in 2 years. And I said, how is that possible? So she began telling me about, so this is a lady who became a widow in her mid-20s. And she began taking care of her children. And she had, when the war happened at that time, she was a business person, not a large business owner, but a small business person. And when the war happened, she said they fled got to safety, she started building, setting things up in a market, and she built a hut, sort of a makeshift home, and the militias were coming, so they had to leave that. They went on to this 2 days of travel to the next safer city close to Kenya, and the militia people were coming. And as they moved and moved and moved close to Kenya, is when they also encountered Kenyan police who saw them as illegals. You can be an illegal alien, depends on where you are, I suppose, and the perspective. But so she was telling me about the different times that she had to move, pick up and move each time. And I asked her about the last story that she shared with me was coming to Virginia. That's where they landed. And then she recited poems about that she made about that journey. And one of them that I remember, roughly if I translate, was when they were left at home, she and her adult grandchildren, several of them, and the immigration person, the host from the church persons, they welcomed them, but they left and they had to be on their own over the weekend until they meet with her again on Wednesday, so about 4 or 5 days. And so she was reciting a poem about, is this me who's now locked behind a wall? What about, and then she's recalling the neighbors' names. She's recalling all the different things that she left behind. And constant self-reflections about her past life. And it's not the only one, but many, many, many stories like that is what I'm documenting. It's difficult to summarize the depth of the stories, and especially as I try to write them in English, there's no words sometimes for translation.
A lot of things can get lost in translation. Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, Diego, we know that there are many ways to document immigrant stories and cultural traditions, and you're sort of doing that, preserving traditional Mexican culture in a variety of ways. Tell us a little bit about your Aztec dance group and what you all do.
Sure. I co-direct Calpulitla Tecutli, which is an Aztec dance group.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah. Calpulitla Tecutli. And the way there's so many groups within the state. But this specific group, it started queer youth led. And that's how it started developing into like who they are right now. Now they're not youth no more, but we expanded to a different many ways of keeping ancestral traditions from different parts of Latin America.
Cool.
So now we exchange traditions, knowledge, traditional medicine knowledge from Ecuador, from Guatemala, from El Salvador, from Mexico, and then we keep it within our group, and then we share within community. So, but the mostly focus within that we are in it is with the Mexican Nahua culture and traditions and ceremonies, which are so similar from Ecuador, which I'm from Ecuador, and the director is from Mexico. And so that's when we started to understand the similarities between all our cultures and traditions in Latin America. One day we literally sit down and we literally tell stories, a bunch of stories. I told my grandma stories, they told their grandma stories, and then we start finding these connections and then who we are right now. A group, they're queer, they're multiracial, they were from different parts of Latin America, and who are committed to keep these traditions, to keep this knowledge ongoing. Basically, we hold ceremonies. We just did a Huitzilopochtli ceremony, which is related to the winter solstice. And now we're gonna do the Mexica New Year ceremony. Is gonna be on March 28th and 29th, 2-day ceremonies, in the American Indian Center. And this is when our year starts in the Aztec calendar. And not many people, always we say, and this is part of colonization, right? But always we say like December 31st, and then we start a new journey. But within the knowledge of our ancestors, basically it's when the agriculture, when everything starts, when the seeds start coming out, when the rain start falling, because it's a new beginning on Mother Earth. And then we start the cycle of it. So, and if you say, like I always explain to the group, it's the way how we see ourselves is the way how we see Mother Earth. Because Mother Earth, we can see here in the United States, it changed. Winter, we have summer, we have, I forgot the other two.
Fall,
Fall,
spring,
spring.
yeah.
We have all of that. But this is the changes that we have.
It
even
all
with
feels
our
like
body.
winter sometimes, yeah.
Right, right. But this is kind of the emotions that we go through it. And same thing is how we're aligning ourselves now with those knowledge and how we take care of ourselves. I can tell you so many stories, so many things that this group does. Sometimes they wake up at 5 in the morning to pray. And I remember we were going to Patternhorn Lake, and you all see us singing because we are going to receive the sun. Because within our traditions, the first lining of the sun is what recharges from energy. And that's how you start your day. And seeing youth doing this, keeping what my great-grandma used to do, keeping what their great-grandmas used to do ongoing, is powerful. Because it's what we're supposed to be doing, passing those knowledge, executing it within, and then keep on going. And understanding the realistically why we're doing this. Because through colonization, through all of this what we're going through, we get to lose that part. We get to lose the knowledge and the important thing of the traditional medicine. We get to lose the important thing of even dancing to release things from our body, even singing to release things from our body that we don't need it through our mouth, through our feet, through making things. So right now, for example, we're in the transition because we're getting ready for our ceremony. So everyone is painting, everyone is getting their regalias ready, everyone is working on their things. And it's so powerful to see them. You know, winter is really sad because you don't have nothing to do most of the time. But seeing them all excited to come and do something and be like, because within the Aztec calendar, we have symbols what represent us. And each of them like, this is my symbol, and because they identify with it.
That's really
For
cool.
example, our co-director, his symbol is a monkey, and he likes to play a lot. So it's just like that. It's understanding the nature of Mother Earth and understanding our nature, how similar we are, and we move in cycles. It helps us to release, conserve that knowledge, conserve the tradition, because one day we're gonna feel frustrated of life, and we don't have none of this. You know, I was something that my grandma taught me was, whenever you're sad, whenever you cannot do no more in your day, leave everything, go for a walk near a lake, find the biggest tree that you can see, and hug the tree. Sit down with it and ask the tree to take away things that you don't need it. And it works. Like, it works. Like I'm not gonna lie, when I arrived to America, my relationship with my mom was not the best because I was raised by my grandma. And I was getting to know her, and she was putting so many rules that I was like, we need to know each other, you know? But it worked it out thanks to all the knowledge that my grandma passed on to me. So I was really patient. I was really grounded. And this is the part, is being grounded in who you are. It's passed on to it. Because why I'm really committed to this is because one day I was trying to be part of a group, and I got told that I didn't even know my own history. And I don't deserve it to be there. So I know so many youth who get here and the culture shock of it, like sometimes you get people start bullying you. And then you just like, I had to hide everything. So this is why it's really necessary to empower the youth to be who they are, no matter what, and support them. And that was the nature of Kalpuli Tlautecutli, empower queer youth of color, and anyone who wants to learn and knows where they come from, and then help us to keep those traditions.
I love it. I'm going to put you on the spot because you designed your pants, you told me. And those are really cool. So
Yeah.
I feel empowered to wear cool pants now. Thank you. I wanted to ask you one more question about, and this is something I've even experienced in my own culture and community, is how do older community members respond when they see these, traditional ceremonies practiced, and of course, sort of with your own twist, and the new generation is always bringing in fresh perspectives. So what are you hearing from them? What do they tell you about it?
Something really, my grandma now, she's a really Christian, religious person, which we respect each other. We love each other. But one time, I brought her to one of our ceremonies. And then when we went back home, and then she started telling me, I need to tell you something. I was like, yes. When I was 16, now she's 78, we used to have people dancing what you used to do here. I never knew it.
Wow.
And then she used to tell me they used to be so powerful. Everyone used to enjoy, and they used to just dance and dance and dance. And I didn't even know. I lived in that town for 17 years. I didn't even knew about that. And just hearing that part, and also hearing elders, because we do have elders who visit us from Mexico, and seeing the work that we do, they are just happy to see besides the whole ideology of religions, of other beliefs, because we welcome everybody, because we don't have pushback to no one, but seeing how we synchronize everything to one sense, who is you, what we care is about you. So it's so powerful to see their support. It's so powerful to see elders come to us and just keep going. You're doing great. It is powerful, and seeing how even my grandma, who is a religious person who decided to forget about everything ancestrally, telling me, keep going.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So it is really powerful, and I can tell so many other stories. I can see some other members of the Kalpuli Tlautecutli here. There too, they're going through the same thing. We're going through the same cycle, like someone saying, generations. We're breaking that part. What colonization has brought up to us, we are the kind of little warriors. It's our time now, And we're here. We're not going nowhere. And I know my own history now.
I love that. You're all doing that in a way. Through dance, through swimming in the water and not being afraid of it, through writing, through preserving history. It's wonderful.
Yeah, definitely. And this is a question for all the panelists. So I bet there's a lot of listeners right now, and probably younger people, who are thinking about the family stories that they're missing out on. Not everyone gets a chance to record oral history of their families. And so what would you say to help get folks to understand a really easy way for those listeners to start learning about their own family's journeys?
Thank you. Great question. I think listen. I think we as a society tends to talk a lot, but I think really listen, right? Ask questions and listen. Hear other people's stories, and as my fellow panelists has been sharing their stories, I see so many similarities. Of struggles, of resiliency, So yeah, just listen.
So I want to actually speak on my own household, my own family. I think storytelling is accessible, it's affordable, it can happen anywhere. In terms of preservation, I think being able to use the phone has been so easy and so accessible. But I think continuing to tell the stories, and also with bullying, I believe that it is so essential to have these kind of dialogues within schools, and for the parents to talk to the children who might be going through those things on a daily basis. We have our son is here. I check in with him, going to the school, checking in with him, and telling him to tell you their experiences. I think what I find helpful is that children with immigrant backgrounds actually they're more. I would say they're very well-rounded, being dual language.
Can
being
confirm.
Sorry.
I said can confirm. Just made a joke.
And I think bringing attention to their capacity and their brain, even the way that multilingual brain works is different, and allowing them to know that they have a window through which to see different places, different vantage point. And I think that can be very powerful. So that I'm really, I don't feel that sometimes being an immigrant is, I don't believe that it's a status. It's not stationary. It's not fixed. It's fluid. So I resist against that. I think I don't see myself. Actually, my self identity is much broader. It's much more global. I think people who are immigrants who have lived in different places become that way. They become very versatile. They become adaptable. And I think it's important to tap into all of those assets rather than the negatives that we so often hear. Yeah.
Thank you.
Something that I would suggest is be curious and take a time for yourself to let all the curiosity and right questions. Sometimes can be really complex to bring trauma back in families. Sometimes can be a little bit challenge in it, but always there's that time and take advantage of it and run with it, because once you have the spot, you're gonna be able to ask all those questions. And the main part, and I will agree with you, is listen, digest, because it is really important to listen to understand and not just hear it, because then we're gonna let go of that sentiment, the emotion in it. So I would say be curious, write down all your questions, and find the part where you're gonna be like, the book's gonna open now, and ask all those questions. Just don't make that person overwhelming, because it can be a challenge. But yes, being curious is really important because you learn a lot about other people. If you want to learn stories from other people, be respectful to it. And that's the main part of it. Yes.
I would suggest everyone to get out of their comfort zone. So that means donate. Instead of buying that pair of new sneakers, maybe that can be donated to a newcomer who has just recently arrived and needs a new pair. Show up to a protest or a rally. Volunteer. Go out to new spaces, meet new people. Connect. Listen. But also learn how to step in as well and share and use your voice to amplify what needs to be heard. Showing up, like all of you that, probably did today. There's so many ways to do this, and we oversimplify things or we psych ourselves not to do it because we're so familiar with it. And so once we get out of that comfort zone and do new things, that's how we grow. And that's where empathy grows, and that's where connection, knowing that we're more connected than different. When you have meet each other in that space, and you know you're gonna be, you're united, you're unified in that way.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. And I want to thank you all in the audience for joining us tonight. We so appreciate that you all showed up. And thank you, of course, to our wonderful panelists. I'm going to remind folks who are watching, who will listen later, who you all are. So we've got Julie Vang. She is the program manager at Green Card Voices. Marianne Hassan, educator preserving Somali oral histories. Sangmani Labut, a scholar and one of the founders of the Immigrant Stories Project at the Immigration History Research Center. Diego Waman, a community leader and advocate, and of course, my co-moderator is Caitlin Vu, immigration reporter with Sahan Journal.
Thank you, Sarah, as well. Thank you all to community members here tonight and the St. Paul Neighborhood Network for helping us with this conversation. Lastly, I also want to thank folks from Sahan Journal and MPR who helped behind the scenes to make tonight happen.
Thank you.
I want to thank NPR and Sahan because as a local media has such a big role to tell stories of people who are coming to Minnesota and the depth of what they bring and expose that by inviting them to tell stories, and you do that so well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I know Caitlin can agree, we really care about putting face to the numbers and humanizing stories. And so to everybody here, if you have story ideas, please email me and Caitlin. We work collaboratively with each other, but we would love to know if there are any stories in the community that you feel should be highlighted. I'm always looking for new ideas. And you too, let me know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Everyone, we have snacks in the back, so feel free to grab any of the snacks back there.
Today, he made his pants today.
Wow.